Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. Dr. Samuel Harrison's day had started normally enough with his usual breakfast of synthetic protein bars and coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a sock. As the resident xenobiologist aboard Meridian Gate Research Station, Sam had grown accustomed to unusual mornings, but nothing had prepared him for the moment when reality decided to throw him into the deep end of interstellar diplomacy without so much as a life preserver. The alert klaxons had been wailing for the better part of an hour, announcing the arrival of the Sanguine Collective's diplomatic vessel. Sam pressed his face against the observation deck's transparent aluminum viewport, watching as a ship that looked more like a Gothic cathedral than a spacecraft materialized from quantum-fold space. Its dark metal hull was adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living shadows, and bioluminescent veins pulsed along its surface in rhythm with something that might have been a heartbeat. "Harrison, get down to Conference Bay Alpha 6, Commander Torres's voice crackled through his communicator. "We need all department heads present for first contact protocols." Sam gulped down the rest of his terrible coffee and hurried through Meridian Gate's corridors, his mind racing through everything he knew about the Sanguines. They were an ancient species, rumored to be the inspiration for humanity's vampire legends after some long-forgotten contact centuries ago. They possessed technology that bordered on magic, lived for millennia, and according to the preliminary reports, they fed on life force rather than blood. The diplomatic team had been preparing for months, but Sam had been so focused on the biological aspects of potential contact that he'd barely skimmed the cultural briefings. Conference Bay Alpha 6 buzzed with nervous energy as Sam slipped through the doors. The room had been configured for maximum diplomatic impressiveness, with holographic displays showing humanity's greatest achievements and a carefully arranged seating area that suggested equality without appearing presumptuous. Commander Torres stood at the head of the table, her usually unflappable demeanor betrayed by the slight tremor in her hands as she reviewed her notes for the 100th time. "Dr. Harrison," she acknowledged with a nod. "Good, we're all here. Remember everyone, this is our species' first formal contact with the Sanguine Collective. Everything we do in the next few hours could determine whether humanity gets a new ally or becomes the galaxy's next cautionary tale." Sam took his assigned seat between Dr. Petrosky from Engineering and Ambassador Ambassador Williams from the Colonial Authority. The room fell silent as the air itself seemed to shimmer, and a circular section of the floor began to glow with an eerie purple light. The quantum portal that materialized was a masterpiece of controlled energy, creating a doorway that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The first figure to step through was clearly a guard or attendant, tall and pale with the characteristic pointed ears that marked all Sanguines. But it was the second figure that made Sam's breath catch in his throat. She moved like poetry given form, her pale skin luminescent in the artificial lighting, and her dark hair flowing around her shoulders like liquid shadow. Her ears were more delicately curved than her companions, and her eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of experience. She wore robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself, shifting through shades of deep purple and silver as she moved. Sam's brain, which usually functioned quite well for scientific analysis, decided to take an unscheduled vacation. Later, he would blame this momentary lapse on everything from low blood sugar to temporary oxygen deprivation, but in that instant, faced with the most ethereally beautiful being he'd ever encountered, his mouth opened and delivered the words that would change his entire life. "You're absolutely beautiful." The silence that followed was so profound that Sam was pretty sure he could hear his own heart hammering against his ribcage. Every human in the room turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from horror to disbelief, while the Sanguine delegation did something Sam hadn't expected. They dropped to one knee. Every single one of them, including the ethereal woman who was apparently their leader, knelt as if Sam had just been revealed as some sort of deity. The woman's luminous eyes widened, and a flush of deep crimson spread across her pale cheeks as she stared at him with an expression that seemed to combine shock, gratitude, and something that might have been resignation. Sam began, but Commander Torres cut him off with a sharp gesture. The Sanguine woman rose gracefully to her feet, her movements fluid despite what appeared to be considerable emotional turmoil. She spoke in a voice like silver bells, her words carrying a musical quality that made Sam's translator implant work overtime to provide meaning. I am Lysandra Velthara of the third bloodline, keeper of the ancient ways, and... She paused, her voice catching slightly, it would seem, you're betrothed. Sam felt the color drain from his face as the full weight of that statement hit him. I'm sorry, my what now? Ambassador Williams leaped to his feet, diplomatic training kicking in even as confusion clouded his features. Honored Lysandra, there may have been a cultural misunderstanding. Dr. Harrison is our xenobiologist, not our primary diplomatic representative, and I believe his words were merely an observation of. Lysandra raised a hand, and Williams fell silent. Her eyes never left Sam's face as she continued. In the presence of witnesses from both our peoples, Samuel Harrison of Earth has spoken the binding words. The ritual of eternal union has been invoked. The what now? Sam squeaked, his voice climbing several octaves higher than he preferred. One of Lysandra's attendants, a male sanguine with intricate silver markings adorning his pointed ears, stepped forward and began chanting in their melodious language. Sam's translator provided a running commentary that made his situation progressively worse. Let it be recorded that on this day, in the sight of stars and witnesses, the hearts of two souls have been declared as one. Let the preparations begin for the binding ceremony, as is tradition and law. Commander Torres moved to Sam's side, her diplomatic smile looking somewhat strained. Perhaps we could discuss the cultural implications of this situation. I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Lysandra's expression softened slightly, and Sam caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in her ancient eyes. Commander Torres, I understand your concern, but the binding words have been spoken freely and in truth before witnesses of both our kinds. To refuse the bond now would bring dishonor upon both my bloodline and Dr. Harrison's declaration. Sam found his voice, though it still squeaked slightly. But I didn't know. I mean, I was just, you are beautiful, that's just a fact, but I wasn't proposing marriage or bonding or whatever this is. The vulnerability in Lysandra's eyes deepened, and Sam immediately felt like he'd kicked a puppy. A very elegant, potentially dangerous, centuries-old puppy, but still. The intention matters not, she said quietly. The words were true, were they not? Sam opened and closed his mouth several times, looking remarkably like a fish that had suddenly developed opinions about quantum physics. Because yes, the words had been true. Devastatingly, completely, embarrassingly true. Yes, he admitted. But. Then the bond stands, Lysandra said with finality that seemed to surprise even her. The ceremony will take place in 3 days, as tradition demands. This will give both our peoples time to prepare. Ambassador Williams stepped forward again, his diplomatic training warring with his obvious desire to strangle Sam. Honored Lysandra, surely there must be some provision for cultural misunderstandings. Dr. Harrison had no knowledge of your customs when he spoke. Lysandra's attendant, who had introduced himself as Valdris during the chaos, consulted what appeared to be a holographic scroll that materialized in the air before him. The Codex of Binding is clear, Ambassador. Once the ritual of eternal union has been invoked, it can only be concluded or. He paused, his expression darkening, dishonored through public rejection, which would bring shame upon both bloodlines and require ritual combat to restore honor. Sam felt the room temperature drop several degrees as the implication sank in. Ritual combat? Like, to the death? Not necessarily, Valdris replied helpfully. Though it often works out that way. Commander Torres rubbed her temples as if fighting off a migraine of galactic proportions. Dr. Harrison, a word? She dragged Sam to a corner of the conference room while the two diplomatic teams regarded each other with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. Lysandra remained standing in the center of the room, looking like a statue carved from moonlight and regret. Sam, Torres whispered urgently, please tell me you have some idea how to fix this. I barely understand what's happening, Sam whispered back. One minute I'm admiring alien architecture, the next minute I'm apparently engaged to a vampire from space. She's not technically a vampire, Dr. Petrosky interjected, having somehow managed to eavesdrop despite their attempts at privacy. More like a psychic energy parasite with a cultural obsession with formal ceremonies. That's not helping, Petrosky, Torres hissed. Sam looked back at Lysandra, who was now in quiet conference with her retinue. Even in discussion, she moved with a grace that made him think of dancers and predators in equal measure. Her pointed ears twitched occasionally, and Sam realized she was probably listening to their conversation despite the distance. What if? Sam said slowly, what if I don't try to fix it? Torres stared at him as if he'd announced his intention to juggle antimatter. Excuse me? I mean, look at this from a xenobiological perspective, Sam continued, his scientific mind finally kicking back into gear. We're talking about first contact with a species that's been spacefaring longer than humans have had agriculture. They have technology we can barely comprehend and a culture that clearly values honor and tradition above convenience. If I reject this binding, not only do I potentially insult an entire civilization, but I might also start an interstellar incident that could get people killed. And if you go through with it, Torres pointed out, you could be stuck in an alien marriage for the rest of your very short human lifespan while married to someone who could probably drain your life force by accident. Sam glanced at Lysandra again and caught her watching him with an expression that seemed to combine hope and resignation in equal measure. She doesn't look like she wants this any more than I do, he murmured. Maybe we can figure something out. Together. Torres sighed deeply. Sam, you realize you're talking about marrying someone from a completely different species? Someone you've known for approximately 15 minutes? Technically, Sam replied with a weak attempt at humor, I've known her for 20 minutes now. And besides, how different can she be? I mean, aside from the life draining and the centuries of experience and the completely incompatible biology and culture. Torres stared at him for a long moment, then turned back toward the diplomatic assembly. Right. Dr. Harrison has decided to honor the binding. We'll need time to discuss the cultural and legal implications. Lysandra's relief was so palpable that Sam felt it from across the room. She inclined her head gracefully toward him, and when she spoke, her voice carried a warmth it hadn't held before. Samuel Harrison of Earth, she said formally, I thank you for your honor. The next 3 days will allow us to learn of each other before the binding ceremony makes our union eternal. Sam managed what he hoped was a reassuring smile, though he suspected it looked more like the expression of someone who had just realized they were falling off a very high cliff. Looking forward to it, he said, and to his surprise, he realized he actually meant it. After all, how complicated could an interstellar marriage between incompatible species possibly be? Sam spent the first night after his accidental proposal researching sanguine culture with the desperate intensity of a student cramming for finals, if finals could potentially result in interdimensional marriage or ritual combat death. The station's database contained frustratingly little information about sanguine bonding rituals, mostly because previous contact attempts had ended with the sanguines politely declining further interaction and disappearing into quantum fold space. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's cultural anthropologist, had been summoned from her research on the Cygnus colonies and arrived looking like she'd been awake for 3 days straight. Sam, she said, dropping into the chair across from him in the station's main library, I've been reviewing everything we know about sanguine social structures, and I have good news and bad news. Give me the bad news first, Sam said, not looking up from his holographic display of sanguine biological data. I'm getting used to it. The bad news is that the ritual of eternal union is exactly what it sounds like. In sanguine culture, marriage bonds are psychically reinforced and literally unbreakable. They share life force for the duration of their partnership, which for sanguines typically means several millennia. Sam's coffee mug slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the table. And the good news? The good news is that interspecies bonding has never been attempted before, so there's no precedent for how long you'd be bound together. You might only be married until one of you dies of old age. Elena, that's not exactly reassuring. Sorry. I'm running on caffeine and terror here. Sam rubbed his temples, trying to process the implications. What else do we know about their culture? Anything that might help me understand what I'm getting into? Elena activated her own holographic display, scrolling through ethnographic data. Well, sanguines are empathic to varying degrees. Most of them suppress their emotional responses because they consider feelings to be a weakness that interferes with logical decision-making. They're also extremely long-lived, with the oldest recorded sanguine being over 3,000 years old. Great. So I'm marrying someone who's emotionally repressed and old enough to remember when humans were still figuring out agriculture. Actually, Lysandra is relatively young for a sanguine, only about 500 years old. And here's where it gets interesting. Elena leaned forward, her expression brightening slightly. According to the cultural briefings, she's considered something of an outcast among her own people because she experiences emotions more intensely than is considered proper for their society. Sam looked up from his data pad with renewed interest. So she's the emotional equivalent of a rebel? More like someone who doesn't quite fit the mold. The sanguines value control and logic above all else, but Lysandra apparently has difficulty suppressing her empathic responses. That's actually why she was chosen for this diplomatic mission. Her emotional sensitivity makes her better at understanding other species, but it also makes her less desirable as a partner within sanguine society. A soft chime indicated an incoming message on Sam's personal communicator. The sender was listed as Velthara, and Sam's heart did something complicated when he realized Lysandra had figured out how to use human communication systems. Dr. Harrison, her message read, I would be honored if you would join me for evening meal in Observation Lounge Beta. I believe we should discuss our situation before the bonding ceremony. Lysandra. Elena read the message over his shoulder. Well, at least she's taking initiative. That's probably a good sign. Sam arrived at Observation Lounge Beta to find that Lysandra had somehow transformed the sterile space into something that resembled a cross between a formal dining room and a moonlit garden. Bioluminescent plants from the sanguine ship cast soft purple light throughout the room, while the viewport showed a stunning view of the nebula that surrounded Meridian Gate Station. Lysandra stood with her back to the entrance, her silhouette elegant against the cosmic backdrop. She had changed from her formal diplomatic robes into something that looked more comfortable, flowing fabric that seemed to shift from deep blue to silver depending on the angle of the light. Her pointed ears were adorned with simple silver ornaments that chimed softly when she moved. Dr. Harrison, she said without turning around, thank you for accepting my invitation. Please, just call me Sam, he replied, approaching cautiously. And thank you for all this. It's beautiful. Lysandra turned to face him, and Sam was struck again by the ethereal quality of her features. Her pale skin seemed to glow softly in the bioluminescent light, and her eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of experience. I thought it would be wise for us to become acquainted before we are bound together for eternity, she said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I realize this situation is not what either of us expected. Sam gestured toward the elegant table setting. Did you prepare all this yourself? Food preparation is considered a meditative practice among my people, Lysandra explained, pulling out a chair for him with old-fashioned courtesy. Though I must admit, I am uncertain about human dietary requirements. I hope what I have prepared will be suitable. The meal that followed was unlike anything Sam had ever experienced. Lysandra had somehow created dishes that seemed to incorporate elements from both their cultures. Fruits that tasted like starlight and spices that created synesthetic experiences where Sam could taste colors and hear flavors. The conversation, however, was more challenging than the exotic cuisine. So, Sam said, attempting to break the ice, 500 years old. That's impressive. What's that like? Lysandra's expression grew thoughtful. Lonely, she said simply, then seemed surprised that she had admitted it. I apologize. That was unnecessarily emotional. No, it wasn't, Sam said quickly. I mean, 5 centuries is a long time to be by yourself. Don't apologize for being honest. Lysandra studied him with those ancient eyes. You are very different from what I expected of humans. Most species find our longevity intimidating. I find it fascinating, Sam replied truthfully. From a xenobiological perspective, the mechanisms that allow for such extended lifespans must be incredibly complex. How do you maintain cellular integrity over such long periods? Is it purely biological or do psychic abilities play a role in? He stopped abruptly, realizing he had begun lecturing about her biology like she was a research subject instead of a dinner companion. Sorry. Occupational hazard. I tend to get excited about alien physiology. For the first time since he'd met her, Lysandra laughed. It was a sound like silver bells mixed with wind chimes, and it transformed her entire face. I have never had anyone be excited about my physiology for scientific reasons before. Most beings are either frightened by our life-draining abilities or they fetishize our longevity. Well, I am curious about the life-draining thing, Sam admitted. How does that actually work? Is it conscious control or more of an automatic response to touch? Lysandra extended her hand across the table, palm up. Would you like a demonstration? Sam stared at her pale hand, weighing curiosity against self-preservation. Curiosity won. He reached out and gently placed his fingers against her palm. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It started as a slight tingling, then became a warm current that seemed to flow from his hand to hers. Instead of feeling drained, though, he felt energized. Connected. For just a moment, he could sense Lysandra's emotions, her nervousness about the bonding ceremony, her loneliness, and underneath it all, a growing curiosity about the strange human who had accidentally proposed to her. That's not what I expected, Sam said softly, not pulling his hand away. Nor I, Lysandra replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Typically, sharing life force is more predatory. This feels more like. She paused, searching for words. Like harmony. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still touching, before Lysandra gently pulled away. The absence of contact left Sam feeling strangely empty. Sam, she said carefully, I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you truly wish to go through with this bonding? I know you spoke the words in ignorance of their meaning, and while tradition binds us both, I would understand if you wished to choose the path of honorable rejection. The ritual combat thing? Yes. Though I should mention that as the challenged party, you would be facing me in combat, not some champion. Sam looked at her elegant form and tried to imagine himself in physical combat with someone who could drain his life force with a touch. How exactly would that work? I mean, no offense, but you're a 500-year-old psychic vampire with superhuman abilities, and I'm a xenobiologist whose greatest physical achievement is successfully opening pickle jars on the first try. Lysandra's smile returned, warmer this time. The combat would be purely ritual, first touch wins, no permanent harm intended. Though given our respective abilities, you would likely lose very quickly. So my options are marriage to someone I just met or immediate, humiliating defeat in front of both our peoples. That is an accurate assessment. Sam considered this for a long moment, watching the play of nebula light across Lysandra's features. Can I ask you something? Do you want to go through with this? And please be honest, I can handle the truth. Lysandra's composure flickered, and Sam caught a glimpse of the vulnerability she usually kept hidden. I have been unmarriageable by sanguine standards for over 2 centuries, she said quietly. My emotional nature makes me unsuitable as a partner for my own kind, and my longevity makes relationships with shorter-lived species seem futile. This bonding, accidental though it may be, offers me something I had not dared hope for. Which is companionship. Someone who sees my emotional responses as a strength rather than a weakness. Someone who looks at me and sees beauty instead of danger. She paused, her cheeks flushing that distinctive crimson again. I realize this must seem pathetic to you, a centuries-old being grateful for an accidental proposal. It's not pathetic, Sam said firmly. It's honest. And I appreciate honesty. They spent the rest of the evening learning about each other's cultures, sharing stories and discovering unexpected points of connection. Lysandra told him about the destruction of the Sanguine homeworld and her people's struggle to maintain their culture while scattered across the galaxy. Sam shared his childhood fascination with the stars and his dream of making contact with alien civilizations, though he admitted he hadn't expected his first contact to result in immediate engagement. As the evening wound down, Sam found himself genuinely looking forward to learning more about his accidental fiancée. Sure, she could probably kill him with a touch if she wanted to, but she laughed at his jokes and listened to his scientific rambling with genuine interest. There were worse foundations for a relationship. Sam, Lysandra said as they prepared to part ways, tomorrow we must begin the traditional courtship rituals. I should warn you that some of them may seem unusual by human standards. More unusual than accidentally getting engaged through cultural ignorance. Much more unusual. For example, tomorrow you will need to prove your worthiness by allowing me to sample a small portion of your life force while you remain conscious and willing. It is considered the ultimate act of trust between potential bondmates. Sam felt his knees go slightly weak. And if I'm not worthy? Then the bonding is dissolved, and we both suffer the shame of failed courtship, Lysandra said matter-of-factly. Though I should mention that in 5 centuries, I have never encountered a being whose life force resonated as harmoniously with mine as yours did tonight. As Sam made his way back to his quarters, he reflected on the surreal turn his life had taken. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether the station's food synthesizers would ever learn to make decent coffee. Now he was preparing for alien courtship rituals with a psychic vampire who had been alive since before humans had discovered electricity. Elena was waiting for him in the corridor outside his quarters, looking like she'd consumed approximately her body weight in caffeine. How did it go? She asked immediately. Better than expected, Sam replied honestly. She's not what I thought she'd be. More vulnerable. More lonely. More what? Sam paused, trying to find the right words. More like someone I could actually fall in love with, given time. Elena stared at him as if he'd announced his intention to take up competitive black hole diving. Sam, you do realize you're talking about an alien who feeds on life force and could probably break you in half without trying? Elena, you do realize I'm a xenobiologist who has dreamed his entire life of making meaningful contact with an alien civilization? This might be the most scientifically and personally significant opportunity of my lifetime. Elena rubbed her temples. I'm going to need more coffee. And possibly a drink. Or 12. As Sam settled into his bed that night, he found himself thinking about the warmth of Lysandra's hand and the loneliness in her ancient eyes. Maybe this accidental engagement wasn't the disaster everyone thought it was. Maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what both of them needed. Tomorrow, he would find out if he was worthy of bonding with a 500-year-old psychic vampire. He was actually looking forward to it. The worthiness trial was scheduled for mid-morning in what the Sanguines called the Chamber of Resonant Truth, a room that Lysandra's people had configured using their biotechnology to amplify psychic connections. Sam arrived to find the space transformed into something that looked like the inside of a living crystal, with walls that pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to his heartbeat. Lysandra stood in the center of the chamber, no longer wearing her flowing diplomatic robes but instead dressed in what appeared to be ritual attire, a form-fitting garment that looked like it had been woven from liquid starlight. The outfit emphasized her ethereal beauty while somehow making her seem more alien and dangerous than before. Sam, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic properties, are you prepared for the trial of worthiness? As prepared as someone can be for having their life force sampled by a psychic vampire, Sam replied, attempting humor to cover his nervousness. What exactly does this involve? Valdris, Lysandra's attendant, stepped forward carrying what appeared to be an ornate scroll that materialized from thin air. The trial requires the potential bondmate to willingly offer their life essence while remaining conscious and in full control of their faculties. The blood keeper will sample the offering and determine if the life forces are compatible for eternal bonding. And if they're not compatible? Sam asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. Then the bonding is dissolved without dishonor to either party, Valdris explained helpfully. Though such incompatibility typically results in the human experiencing rapid cellular breakdown, psychic feedback, and what your species would term death. Sam felt the color drain from his face. I'm sorry, what now? Lysandra moved closer, her expression showing genuine concern. Sam, the trial is not typically dangerous for compatible partners. If our connection last night was any indication, you should be perfectly safe. But I must give you one final opportunity to choose honorable combat instead. Sam looked around the chamber, taking in the alien technology, the bioluminescent walls, and the woman who had somehow become the most important person in his universe in the span of 48 hours. Lysandra, can I ask you something before we do this? Of course. Why me? I mean, you're elegant, beautiful, centuries old, with abilities I can barely comprehend. I'm a xenobiologist who talks to plants when I'm nervous and once got lost in my own research lab for 6 hours. What could you possibly see in me that makes this worth risking? Lysandra's expression softened, and Sam caught a glimpse of the vulnerability she usually kept hidden beneath her composed exterior. Do you know what it is like to live for centuries surrounded by people who view your emotions as a flaw? To be considered defective because you feel joy and sorrow and curiosity with intensity that your society deems inappropriate? Sam shook his head. For 500 years, I have been the bloodkeeper who feels too much. The diplomat who empathizes with other species instead of maintaining proper detachment. The woman who dreams of connection while her people value isolation. She moved closer, and Sam could see the silver flecks in her violet eyes. Then you looked at me and said I was beautiful, not dangerous, not useful, not powerful, beautiful. And when we touched, you didn't flinch or calculate how to use my abilities for your benefit. You were simply present. Lysandra. You treat my emotions as strengths rather than weaknesses. You listen when I speak of loneliness instead of telling me to suppress such feelings. You see me as Lysandra, not as the bloodkeeper of the third line or a useful diplomatic asset. She paused, her cheeks flushing that distinctive crimson. In 5 centuries, Sam, you are the first being who has made me feel like my emotional nature is a gift rather than a curse. Sam felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with their psychic connection and everything to do with the realization that he was falling in love with an alien vampire who quoted poetry and blushed when she admitted to feelings. Well, he said, managing a smile that felt more confident than he had any right to feel, let's see if we're compatible, shall we? The trial itself was unlike anything Sam had experienced. Lysandra guided him to sit in the center of the chamber while she knelt beside him, her hands hovering just above his skin. The walls around them began to pulse more rapidly, and Sam could feel something building in the air. A tension that made his nerves sing and his vision sharpen. Give me your hands, Lysandra said softly, her voice taking on a musical quality that seemed to harmonize with the chamber's resonance. Sam placed his hands in hers, and immediately the world changed. The sensation was similar to their brief contact the night before, but amplified beyond anything he could have imagined. Instead of a gentle current, he felt Lysandra's consciousness touch his like warm sunlight, and suddenly he was experiencing the world through her senses. Through their connection, Sam felt Lysandra's surprise and wonder as she experienced his memories, his childhood fascination with the stars, his dedication to understanding alien life forms, his loneliness on research stations far from Earth. But instead of the predatory sampling he had expected, the sharing felt like a conversation conducted in emotions and sensations. In return, Lysandra opened her mind to him, and Sam was overwhelmed by the depth of her experiences. He felt centuries of loneliness, the pain of being different from her own people, the devastating loss when the Sanguine homeworld was destroyed. But he also felt her capacity for joy, her fierce protectiveness toward those she cared about, and her desperate hope that this strange human might understand her in ways her own people never had. "Sam," Lysandra whispered, though he wasn't sure if she spoke aloud or directly into his mind, "you are extraordinary." The connection deepened, and Sam began to understand things about sanguine physiology that had puzzled xenobiologists for decades. Their life force feeding wasn't predatory by nature, it was how they formed emotional bonds, sharing energy in a symbiotic relationship that strengthened both partners. The reason Lysandra had been considered unmarriageable wasn't because she was defective, but because her emotional intensity required a partner who could match her capacity for connection. "Compatible," Valdris announced, though his voice seemed to come from very far away. "More than compatible. The resonance is unlike anything in recorded sanguine history." As the connection gradually faded, Sam found himself looking into Lysandra's eyes with new understanding. The trial had revealed that they weren't just compatible, they were complementary in ways that bordered on the miraculous. Her emotional intensity balanced his scientific curiosity, while his steady presence provided the stability she had never found among her own people. "Well," Sam said, his voice slightly hoarse from the intensity of the experience, "that was, wow." Lysandra laughed, the sound bright with relief and joy. "Indeed. Wow seems an appropriate response." Over the next 2 days, as they prepared for the bonding ceremony, Sam and Lysandra discovered that their compatibility extended beyond psychic resonance into nearly every aspect of their personalities. Lysandra's centuries of experience provided perspective on Sam's scientific questions, while his enthusiasm for discovery helped her see familiar concepts through fresh eyes. The cultural learning process, however, provided its own forms of entertainment. Sam's attempt to prove his devotion by learning traditional sanguine poetry resulted in him accidentally composing what Valdris later described as a surprisingly moving sonnet about the mating habits of quantum butterflies. Meanwhile, Lysandra's effort to understand human cuisine led to an incident involving synthesized chocolate that nearly required medical intervention when she discovered that humans had created a food that induced neurochemical euphoria. "How have your species not destroyed itself with this substance?" she asked, still slightly dazed from her first taste of chocolate cake. "We have very strict portion control laws," Sam replied solemnly, then grinned when she realized he was joking. But it was during their evening conversations that Sam truly began to fall in love with the woman behind the ethereal alien facade. Lysandra told him stories of worlds she had visited, civilizations she had helped establish diplomatic contact with, and the gradual erosion of hope she had felt as her emotional nature made her increasingly isolated from her own people. "The destruction of our homeworld scattered the sanguines across the galaxy," she explained one evening as they watched the nebula shift colors outside the observation lounge. "We maintained our culture and our technology, but we lost something essential, our sense of connection to each other. Most of my people now view emotional bonds as vulnerabilities that can be exploited by enemies." "But you don't see it that way," Sam observed. "I cannot. My nature won't allow it." She turned to look at him, her violet eyes reflecting the nebula's light. "Sam, I must tell you something about the bonding ceremony. Once it is complete, we will share not just life force, but emotions, memories, experiences. For a human with your natural lifespan, the bond will likely last until your death. For me, losing you will mean experiencing grief that my people consider a form of madness." Sam reached for her hand, no longer surprised by the warm current that flowed between them. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," she said immediately, then looked surprised by her own certainty. "I have spent 5 centuries avoiding connections that might cause pain. But with you, I find that the possibility of future grief seems insignificant compared to the certainty of present joy." "Lysandra," Sam said softly, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Her smile was radiant enough to illuminate the entire lounge. "I know I am falling in love with you. It is the most wonderful and terrifying thing I have experienced in 500 years. The night before the bonding ceremony, Sam lay awake thinking about the impossible trajectory his life had taken. In less than a week, he had gone from lonely xenobiologist to the soon-to-be husband of an alien woman who could drain his life force with a thought but who blushed when he complimented her cooking. His communicator chimed softly with a message from Lysandra: "Thank you, Sam, for seeing me as I truly am. Tomorrow, we begin our eternal bond. I cannot imagine facing eternity with anyone else. Your devoted Lysandra." Sam smiled as he composed his reply: "Thank you for being patient with a human who accidentally proposed on the first day. I love you, and I'm looking forward to spending however much time we have learning to be worthy of your trust. Sam." Tomorrow, he would bind himself to an alien woman for what might be the rest of his natural life. He couldn't wait. The binding ceremony took place in Meridian Gate's largest observation deck, which the Sanguines had transformed into something that looked like a cathedral made of living crystal and starlight. Bioluminescent vines wound through the space, their soft glow creating patterns that seemed to tell stories in languages Sam couldn't read but somehow understood. Representatives from both species filled the space, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity, wonder, and in some cases, barely concealed bewilderment at the unprecedented nature of the union. Sam stood at what he assumed was an altar, though it looked more like a flowering tree made of silver and light. He wore formal diplomatic attire that Elena had helped him choose, something respectful of both human and sanguine traditions, which apparently meant, formal but not too formal, elegant but not pretentious, and whatever you do, don't wear anything that might accidentally trigger another cultural incident. Lysandra approached through the assembled guests, and Sam's breath caught in his throat. Her ceremonial robes seemed to be woven from captured starlight and shadow, flowing around her like liquid dreams. Her pointed ears bore ornaments that chimed in harmonies that made the entire chamber resonate like a vast musical instrument. But it was her expression that made Sam's heart skip. She was radiant with joy and nervous anticipation in equal measure. Elder Morgathus, who had arrived that morning as the official representative of the Sanguine Council, stood beside the altar with an expression that suggested he was witnessing either a beautiful miracle or a cosmic mistake of unprecedented proportions. At centuries old, even by Sanguine standards, he embodied the traditional Sanguine values of emotional control and logical decision-making. "Beings of two worlds," Elder Morgathus began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority, "we gather to witness a bonding that has no precedent in the history of either species. Samuel Harrison of Earth and Lysandra Velthara of the Third Bloodline have chosen to unite their life forces in eternal bond, despite the vast differences between their peoples." Commander Torres, representing humanity, stepped forward. The United Colonial Authority recognizes this union as valid under interspecies diplomatic law and grants Dr. Harrison full authority to represent humanity in this ceremony. Sam caught Lysandra's eye and managed what he hoped was a reassuring smile. She responded with a look that somehow managed to convey love, nervousness, and amusement at the absurdity of their situation all at once. "Before the bonding can be completed," Elder Morgathus continued, "tradition demands that both parties demonstrate their commitment before witnesses. Samuel Harrison, do you freely offer your life force to Lysandra Velthara, knowing that this bond cannot be broken save by death?" "I do," Sam replied, his voice carrying more clearly than he had expected. "And I offer not just my life force, but my heart, my respect, and my promise to spend whatever time we have learning to be worthy of her trust." Lysandra's eyes widened at his addition to the traditional vows, and Sam caught the slight smile that curved her lips. "Lysandra Velthara," Elder Morgathus intoned, "do you freely accept Samuel Harrison's life force, knowing that you will be bound to one whose lifespan is brief by Sanguine standards, and that losing him will bring grief beyond measure?" "I do," Lysandra replied, her musical voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "And I offer in return my protection, my devotion, and my promise that whatever time we share will be filled with the joy and wonder he has brought into my existence." Elder Morgathus raised his hands, and the chamber's bioluminescent decorations began to pulse in rhythm with some cosmic heartbeat. "Then let the resonance of souls begin." What followed was unlike anything Sam had imagined possible. The gentle psychic connection he had experienced during the trial of worthiness expanded into something that encompassed every aspect of his being. He felt Lysandra's consciousness merge with his own, not erasing his individuality but complementing it in ways that made him more than he had been alone. Through their bond, Sam experienced 5 centuries of Lysandra's memories, her childhood on the lost Sanguine homeworld, the devastation of its destruction, her centuries of loneliness and growing isolation from her own people. But he also felt her fierce intelligence, her capacity for joy, her protective instincts, and the overwhelming relief and wonder she felt at finally finding someone who accepted her emotional nature as a gift rather than a flaw. In return, Sam shared his own experiences, his human childhood under alien stars, his dreams of making contact with other civilizations, his dedication to understanding and protecting life in all its forms. Lysandra experienced his scientific curiosity, his stubborn optimism, and his growing love for a mysterious alien woman who had turned his orderly life into beautiful chaos. The connection deepened beyond anything either species had thought possible. Instead of the typical sanguine bonding, which created a manageable psychic link, Sam and Lysandra's union generated what could only be described as a new form of consciousness, 2 minds that remained individual while sharing a deeper understanding than either had imagined possible. Extraordinary, Elder Morgathus breathed, his composed facade cracking to reveal genuine awe. The resonance is, this should not be possible. The assembled witnesses watched in amazement as the chamber itself seemed to respond to the bonding. The bioluminescent vines grew more radiant, creating patterns that painted both Sam and Lysandra in colors that had no names in any human language. The very air around them seemed to sing with harmonies that touched something primal and joyous in every being present. As the connection stabilized, Sam became aware that he could sense Lysandra's emotions as clearly as his own, while she could feel his thoughts and reactions like music in her mind. Instead of being overwhelming, the sharing felt natural, like finally being able to see colors he hadn't known existed. The bonding is complete, Elder Morgathus announced, though his voice carried wonder rather than mere ceremony. By the ancient laws of the Sanguine people and in the presence of representatives from both our species, Samuel Harrison and Lysandra Velthara are now bound in eternal union. The celebration that followed was unlike any party Sam had ever attended. The Sanguines, normally reserved and controlled, seemed infected by the joy radiating from the newly bonded couple. Even Elder Morgathus was seen actually smiling as he sampled human champagne and declared it an interesting approach to controlled euphoria. But it was during a quiet moment later in the evening, when Sam and Lysandra managed to escape to a private balcony overlooking the nebula, that the true significance of their bond became clear. "Sam," Lysandra said softly, her hand intertwined with his, "I can feel your thoughts. Your wonder at the stars, your excitement about the scientific possibilities of our union, your—" She paused, her cheeks flushing that distinctive crimson, "your complete and overwhelming love for me. Is that overwhelming in a good way or a bad way?" Sam asked, though through their bond he could already sense her answer. "In the most wonderful way imaginable," she replied. "For centuries, I felt too much while surrounded by people who felt too little. Now I share my heart with someone whose capacity for emotion matches my own." Sam turned to face her fully, still marveling at the way the nebula light played across her ethereal features. "Lysandra, what happens now? I mean, practically speaking. Do we live on your ship? Do I need to learn sanguine customs? Are there other bonded couples who might help us figure this out?" Lysandra laughed, the sound carrying more joy than Sam had heard from her before. "We are the first interspecies bonding in recorded sanguine history. We will need to write our own rules. Together?" "Together," she confirmed. "Though I should warn you that sanguine bonded couples typically share everything, thoughts, emotions, experiences. Privacy as humans understand it may become complicated." Sam considered this for a moment, then grinned. "Good thing I don't have any embarrassing secrets." "Well, except for the time I got lost in my own research lab." "I am already aware of that incident through our bond," Lysandra said solemnly. "Along with your tendency to talk to plants when nervous, your habit of eating synthetic protein bars for breakfast despite claiming to enjoy cooking, and your secret fondness for ancient earth music that you consider embarrassingly sentimental." Sam felt his cheeks warm. The bond is very thorough, isn't it? Indeed. I also know that you are concerned about the differences in our lifespans, worried that I will grow bored with human limitations, and wondering if loving me is selfish because my grief at your eventual death will be intense even by sanguine standards. Sam nodded, unable to deny any of it. Lysandra moved closer, her violet eyes serious. Sam, through our bond one have experienced your complete acceptance of my nature. Not just the beautiful parts, but my capacity for consuming life force, my emotional intensity that my own people consider excessive, my centuries of accumulated experiences that could easily make me seem alien and unknowable. You see all of these things and consider them not flaws to be overcome, but aspects of who I am to be treasured. Because they are, Sam said simply. Then you must understand that I feel the same about your human limitations. Your shorter lifespan means you experience time more intensely, finding wonder in things I might take for granted. Your lack of psychic abilities makes your emotional openness all the more precious because it comes from choice rather than compulsion. Your humanity is not something I must tolerate, it is something that completes me in ways I never knew I needed. 6 months later, Sam and Lysandra had established a routine that worked for both their species and their individual natures. They lived aboard a specially modified research vessel that combined human scientific equipment with sanguine biotechnology, traveling between worlds to study interspecies relationships and help establish diplomatic protocols for other unlikely partnerships. Sam had learned to share small amounts of his life force with Lysandra regularly, a process he described in his scientific reports as the galaxy's most intimate form of energy exchange, and in his personal logs as better than coffee and almost as addictive as chocolate. Lysandra had developed a surprising fondness for human cuisine, though her attempts to improve their food synthesizer had resulted in meals that occasionally achieved sentience and tried to negotiate better preparation conditions. Sam, Lysandra said one evening as they watched a binary sunset from their ship's observation deck, "Do you ever regret your accidental proposal?" Sam considered the question seriously, feeling through their bond how important his answer was to her. "I regret that it took an embarrassing cultural misunderstanding for us to meet," he said finally. "But I don't regret a single moment since then. Even when you accidentally drained too much life force during our 3rd week together and I spent 6 hours speaking only in mathematical equations." "You were very eloquent in mathematics," Lysandra replied with a smile. "Though I was relieved when you returned to standard speech patterns." "Lysandra," Sam said, taking her hand and feeling the familiar warm current of their connection, "I love you. Not just because we're bonded, but because you're brilliant and kind and you laugh at my terrible xenobiology jokes and you make me want to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." "And I love you," she replied, "because you see my differences as gifts rather than flaws, because you treat my emotions as treasures rather than burdens, and because in 500 years of existence, you are the only being who has ever made me feel like I was exactly who I was meant to be." As they sat together watching alien stars wheel overhead, Sam reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought them together. A single moment of honest appreciation had triggered a chain of events that changed both their lives completely. Sometimes, he thought, the best relationships begin not with careful planning, but with the courage to speak truth in the moment when it matters most. Through their bond, he felt Lysandra's agreement and her quiet contentment as she shared in his wonder at the infinite possibilities that stretched before them among the stars. After all, when you accidentally marry a psychic vampire and discover she's the love of your life, what's the worst that could happen?